I'm Kieran, 55, a master chef who built La Lumiere into a culinary empire over 15 grueling years. My hands carry scars from 1,000 knife cuts, my hair turned grey, perfecting the sauce that put this place on the map. Then last week, Vincent, that arrogant young manager, summoned me to his cramped office. With a smirk curling his lips, he said, "Kieran, we're refreshing the team. Clear your kitchen by Friday." 15 years of my life, discarded like a spoiled broth. I met his gaze, smiled calmly, and replied, "Completely understand." He blinked, expecting me to beg. He didn't know I'd seen this coming months ago, or that I'd already planned my next move. That sauce, my soul's creation, was never theirs by law. I took it to Étoile Noire, their fiercest rival. By Monday, La Lumiere was collapsing, and Vincent's trembling voice crackled through my phone, pleading for salvation. I savored the faint thyme scent lingering from my old kitchen as I hung up. A clever protégé and a cunning rival flipped the game in ways I never foresaw. Curious how I turned their betrayal into my victory. Stick around, this pot's just starting to simmer. I stood in the narrow office behind La Lumiere's kitchen, the air heavy with the earthy musk of thyme and a faint sting of lemon zest that lingered on my apron after last night's service. For 15 years, I'd turned this place into a culinary cathedral, a haven where every dish carried my mark, especially the sauce that made us famous, a silken blend of rosemary and secrets that kept reservations booked solid. At 55, my hands are a map of scars from decades at the knife, my hair silvered from nights spent chasing that perfect flavor. I'd earned it all, every blister and sleepless hour. So when Vincent, the slick manager half my age, summoned me that Friday morning, I figured he wanted to nitpick my menu again. Instead, he lounged behind his desk, legs crossed in that tailored suit reeking of new money, while a stony-faced HR woman sat beside him, clutching her clipboard like a lifeline. The kitchen's clatter faded as he leaned forward, his smirk sharp as a paring knife, and spoke. "Kieran, after 15 years, we're refreshing the team," he said. "Clear your station by Friday." The words sliced through me, clumsy yet cruel, stripping away a decade and a half like it was nothing. A burnt scrap tossed in the bin. My chest tightened, a flicker of old rage sparking from the days when a chef trashed my first dish and sneered I'd never make it. But I didn't let it show. I met Vincent's smug hazel eyes, saw the glint of victory he thought he'd won, and let a slow, polite smile curl my lips. "Completely understand," I replied, my voice steady as a low flame. He blinked, his smirk twitching, thrown off by my calm. He'd wanted me to crack, to beg, to give him something to crow about. Instead, I stood there, unshaken, and it rattled him more than any outburst ever could. I left the office, the door clicking shut with a hollow thud, and stepped back into the kitchen, my domain, or so I'd believed. The hiss of oil in pans and the rhythmic chop of knives greeted me, a familiar chaos I'd mastered. I moved past the line cooks, their aprons splattered with the morning's prep, and caught their sidelong glances, curiosity tinged with unease. Word travels fast in a kitchen, they'd sensed the shift, probably overheard Vincent's grand talk of modernizing La Lumiere into some glossy chain for tourists with fat wallets. I stopped at my station, my scarred fingers tracing the grooves in the wooden counter where I'd crafted that sauce. The memory hit me hard. Those early nights as a sous chef, alone with a flickering stove, blending herbs until my tongue buzzed and my back screamed. All for that moment, the owner tasted it and called it genius. I'd taught kids like Tina how to dice an onion without tears, stood with them through brutal rushes, and skipped my own birthdays to keep this place alive. Vincent thought he could erase that, thought I was some fossil to sweep out. The betrayal burned, a bitter aftertaste I couldn't swallow. But I kept my face still. I inhaled the warm scent of roasted shallots drifting from the oven and let it steady me. They'd pay for this, not with shouts or fists, but with something sharper. That's when I remembered the ace I'd tucked away. Months ago, I'd been rifling through dusty files in that same office, chasing a hunch after Vincent started hovering too close, asking about my recipes with that fake grin. I found it, or rather, didn't find it. No patent, no contract tying my sauce to La Lumiere. The recipe, every precise pinch and simmer, was mine alone, locked in my head like a vault. I'd seen the signs, his secret huddles with corporate suits, the way he'd eye me like I was expendable. I'd known this day might come, and I'd prepared with the patience of a slow braise. I glanced at the clock, 11:47 a.m., and felt a quiet thrill flicker beneath my calm. Vincent thought he'd gutted me, but he'd handed me the spark to torch his little kingdom. I'd leave with my knives and my notebooks, sure, but the real weapon was the final step of that sauce. A whisper of smoked paprika only I knew to add, the soul they'd never replicate. They'd figure that out too late. As the lunch rush loomed, I caught Tina's eye across the kitchen. She was julienning carrots with the focus I'd drilled into her, but her brow creased, her dark eyes darting to me with a question she didn't voice. She'd been my shadow for 2 years, a quick learner with a fire I recognized from my younger self. I gave her a small nod, a silent, "I'm fine," and she hesitated before nodding back, her knife pausing mid-cut. I didn't know then she'd seen more than I thought, maybe even glimpsed the truth about the sauce, but her quiet trust steadied me. I turned back to my station, the pot simmering, flames licking the burners, and let the reality sink in. They thought I'd slink away, a faded name on a faded menu. But I'd known this was coming, and I'd been tending my own fire. By Friday, I'd walk out with my head high. By Monday, they'd choke on the ashes. Vincent thought he'd plated the final dish, but he didn't see the heat I'd bring. I gripped my favorite knife, its worn handle fitting my palm like an old friend, and smiled to myself. This wasn't over, it was just the amuse-bouche. I sat at my kitchen table that Friday evening, the city's distant hum seeping through the cracked window of my small apartment. The sharp scent of rosemary wafted from a pot on the sill, a quiet balm after the sting of Vincent's dismissal earlier that day. I'd walked out of La Lumiere with my knives and notebooks cradled under my arm, my pride intact despite the betrayal still simmering in my chest. Before me lay my old leather journal, its pages a testament to 15 years of sweat and genius. There, in my jagged scrawl, was the sauce that had made La Lumiere a name. Garlic, cream, and that final whisper of smoked paprika that turned it into something unforgettable. No patent tied it to them, no contract locked it away. It was mine, a secret I'd guarded like a rare spice, and now it was my weapon. I'd seen Vincent's game coming, his sidelong glances and corporate whispers, and I'd prepared for this moment with the patience of a slow simmer. Tonight, I'd set the wheels in motion to turn their arrogance into ashes. I grabbed my phone and dialed a number I'd memorized months ago, back when I first caught wind of Vincent's schemes. Étoile Noire, La Lumiere's fiercest rival, had been circling in my mind since a critic raved about their ambition at a tasting last spring. Elias, their owner, picked up on the third ring, his voice deep and deliberate, like a man who weighed every flavor he met. I'd crossed paths with him once, his keen eyes sizing me up over a glass of Pinot as he praised my sauce with a nod that lingered in my memory. I cut to the chase. "Elias, it's Kieran from La Lumiere," I said. "I've got something you need to taste." "When and where?" he asked, curiosity sharpening his tone. "Tomorrow, noon, your kitchen," I replied. "Bring an open mind." "Consider it done," he said, a faint chuckle hinting at his intrigue. I hung up, my heart kicking up a notch as I pictured Vincent's smug face crumbling. Étoile Noire wasn't just a restaurant, it was a threat La Lumiere feared, and I was about to hand them the key to its ruin. That night, I prepped with focus, gathering herbs and my jar of smoked paprika, each ingredient a step in the plan I'd kept close. Saturday noon found me in Étoile Noire's gleaming kitchen, a maze of stainless steel and bubbling pots, my crate of supplies at my side. Elias met me with a firm handshake, his grey hair swept back, his apron crisp amid the controlled chaos. I started cooking, the rhythm of chopping garlic and swirling cream steadying me as the sauce took shape. The air thickened with its aroma, rich and warm, and when it was ready, I slid a small bowl across to him. "Taste it," I said, my voice calm despite the pulse hammering in my throat. He scooped up a spoonful, brought it to his lips and paused, his eyes narrowing as he savored it. A slow grin broke across his face. "This is La Lumiere's soul, isn't it?" he asked, setting the spoon down. "Mine, not theirs," I corrected. "They never claimed it." "How do we keep this under wraps?" he pressed, leaning closer, his tone shifting to business. "Give me a place here and a front row seat to their fall," I said, holding his gaze. "That's all I need." He nodded, his grin turning sharp. "We've got a deal." I left Étoile Noire with a handshake and a spark igniting in my chest, the plan locked in place. But as I walked home under the grey afternoon sky, a flicker of doubt crept in. La Lumiere had been my world, a place where I'd shaped raw kids into cooks and fed souls with every plate. I saw the owner's grin when he first tasted my sauce, heard the clink of glasses from regulars who'd become friends. Had I turned my back on them too? Then Vincent's voice cut through, his smug, refreshing the team echoing in my ears, and I saw the truth. He'd gutted what I'd built, turned it into a cash cow for faceless suits. This wasn't about them. It was about him. I pushed the guilt aside, my steps firming on the pavement. Monday would bring their reckoning, and I'd be the one holding the flame. What I didn't see then was Vincent's own shadow moving in the game. I'd felt it that week. A prickling sense that someone was watching me too closely, maybe tailing me past the market where I bought my herbs. Later, I'd learn he'd been sneaking off to Elias too, spinning tales of his own worth, claiming he could deliver my secrets. He thought he'd outsmart me, thought Elias would bite at his hollow promises. But Elias was a fox, playing us both for now, waiting to see who'd come out on top. That twist lay beyond my sight as I settled back at my table, the rosemary scent wrapping around me like a vow. I flipped open my journal, the source's final step staring back, a quiet power no one could steal. Vincent had tried to burn my legacy down, but I'd stoke a fire he'd never see coming. I leaned back, the stillness settling over me, and pictured Monday, his panic, the silence of empty tables, the taste of his defeat. A smile curved my lips, small but fierce. This wasn't revenge, it was justice, and I'd serve it with heat. Friday came with a grey drizzle soaking the streets outside La Lumiere, the damp air seeping through the back door as I stepped inside for the last time. I carried my old wooden crate, its edges worn smooth, clutching my knives and journal against the ache tugging at my chest. The kitchen hummed with life, the sizzle of butter in pans and the sharp clack of knives slicing through the quiet I'd once commanded. After 15 years, I'd made this place a legend, but today it felt distant, like a dish I'd plated for someone else. Vincent had set my deadline at shift's end, and I sensed his gaze from his office window, a smug silhouette waiting to see me break. The line cooks shot me quick glances, their eyes flickering with pity, their hands moving fast to bury the unease. I set my crate on my station, my fingers brushing the scarred wooden counter where I'd birthed the sauce that defined us. I packed with steady hands, rolling my knives into their leather sleeve, stacking my notebooks neatly. Vincent wanted it all handed over, a final grab at my work, but he'd never touched the real prize, the secret simmering in my mind. I pulled my spare apron from the locker, its stains a map of past battles, and tucked it into the crate. Then I took the binder I'd kept for the team, filled with basic recipes like stocks and roux, nothing near the sauce's soul. Vincent strode out, his polished shoes clicking, his arms crossed as he stopped a few feet away, his smirk cutting through the steam. "Everything in order, Kieran?" he asked, his voice thick with mock care. "Everything you asked for," I replied, giving him a calm nod. "Good," he said, stepping closer. "You're replaceable, you know. We'll be fine without you." "If you say so," I said, my smile small and sharp. He hesitated, his eyes narrowing for a heartbeat, but he shrugged it off, taking the binder and my keycard with a grunt. He thought he'd won, thought he held the kitchen's essence in his hands, but he was blind. The sauce's final touch, that whisper of smoked paprika, stayed with me, unwritten, untouchable. They'd fumble without it, chasing a flavor they'd never pin down. I'd given them what they demanded, but I'd kept the spark they couldn't steal. Vincent turned back to his office, his stride cocky, and I watched him go. the weight of my plan settling firm and warm around me. The lunch rush was fading when Tina caught me near the pass, her dark eyes sharp with urgency. She'd been chopping herbs all morning, her hands steady, but her face betrayed a storm. She'd learned from me for 2 years, her quick mind soaking up every lesson, and now she stepped close, her voice a hushed blade over the clatter. "Kieran, I know the sauce isn't in there," she said. "The binders are fake, isn't it?" I stopped, my hand hovering over the crate, her words jolting me. "What makes you think that?" "I've watched you tweak it," she said, her gaze fierce, "and I saw those files you checked, the ones with no patent. Let me come with you." My breath caught, her sharpness cutting through my guard. She'd noticed my habits, the way I'd adjust the sauce by feel, and she'd pieced it together with that late-night glimpse of me rifling through papers months ago. I hadn't meant for this, hadn't wanted to pull her into my blaze, but her fire matched mine, a hunger I couldn't turn away. "Meet me outside after shift," I said, keeping my voice low. "We'll figure it out." She nodded, swift and sure, then slipped back to her station, leaving me unsteady. She'd seen through my smoke, shifted my plan with her bold step, and I'd have to rethink the path ahead. As the shift wound down, I took a final sweep of the kitchen. Pots bubbled, flames licked the burners, the air heavy with roasted garlic and fading echoes. I lifted my crate and walked to the door, pausing where the heat met the cold. This place had been my life, and leaving it stung, a quiet wound tangled with the pulse of what I'd set in motion. Vincent thought he'd erased me, thought I'd vanish into the rain. He didn't know the fuse was already burning. I stepped outside, the drizzle cool against my skin, the scent of wet asphalt mixing with the ghost of time on my hands. The door thudded shut, muffling the kitchen's heartbeat, and I stood there, my crate solid in my grip. Tina would join me soon, her loyalty a wild card I hadn't dealt myself. Monday loomed, the day they'd taste the void I'd left, the sauce they'd never reclaim. Vincent's words rang in my ears, "We'll be fine without you." And I let a real smile break through, edged with certainty. He'd served his triumph too early, but my fire was just catching. This wasn't the end, it was the glow before the inferno. Monday morning arrived with a crisp bite in the air, the kind that sharpened every scent as I stepped into Étoile Noire's kitchen. The space thrummed with energy, steel clanging against steel, pots simmering with a low bubble, the faint tang of citrus slicing through the warmth of roasting spices. I'd spent Sunday with Tina at my apartment, sketching out the plan over steaming coffee. Her quick nods stoking the fire I'd carried since Vincent's dismissal. Now, I stood at my new station, my crate unpacked, my knives glinting under the stark lights. Elias met me with a firm handshake, his grey eyes sharp with expectation as he clapped my shoulder. The team moved around us, aprons crisp, hands swift, all poised for the moment we'd unveil the sauce that would claim this place. I set to work, my hands falling into the rhythm of 15 years, garlic popping in the pan, cream folding in smooth, and that whisper of smoked paprika drifting through the mix. The aroma bloomed, rich and bold, and I passed a tasting spoon to Elias. He sampled it, his grin spreading slow and sure, and I knew we'd hit the mark. By noon, the news broke fast. Étoile Noire had a new star, my creation, and critics were already crowding the door, ready to bury La Lumiere's dimming glow. I leaned against the counter, the stove's heat steady at my back, and let a quiet pride settle in. A warmth that felt like mine again. I didn't need to be at La Lumiere to know it was falling apart. Elias had gotten word that morning from a friend in the trade, a sharp whisper over breakfast. The weekend had been a disaster, the sauce a thin echo without me, customers walking out mid-meal. Monday's rush would seal it, and I could see Vincent in my mind, his tailored suit creased, his voice cracking as he pushed a floundering team. The binder I'd left them sat useless, its pages empty of the spark they'd never grasp, and the kitchen would stumble, orders stacking up, tables clearing out. Elias had grinned as he relayed the tale, his voice low with relish, and I'd nodded, the image crisp enough without seeing it myself. The sting of their betrayal faded with every detail. A bitter note I didn't need to taste again. Tina worked beside me, her knife flashing through herbs, her quick smile catching my eye as we plated the first orders. She'd leapt in with both feet, her energy a mirror to mine, and together we'd made Étoile Noire a force they couldn't ignore. The day hummed along, the kitchen alive with motion, my sauce weaving through every dish, each plate a step towards something new. Elias paced the line, his commands calm, his approval a quiet nod, and I felt the pulse of a fresh start take root. I wasn't here to crow, I was here to cook, to reclaim what I'd lost under Vincent's shadow. The guilt I'd carried slipped away, replaced by the steady beat of purpose, the kind I'd forgotten in La Lumiere's final days. Then, late afternoon, my phone buzzed against my thigh, Vincent's name flashing on the screen. I stepped outside, the cool air brushing my face, and answered, bracing for the crack in his armor. "Kieran, it's a mess," he said, his voice tight and shaky. "The source, we can't get it right. Come back, please." I let the pause hang, hearing the strain in his breath, the clatter of a dying kitchen behind him. "Completely understand," I said, my tone flat, a mirror of his words that Friday. "Kieran, wait," he pleaded, but I cut the line, the silence sharp and final. I stood there, the phone warm in my hand, a grin breaking through, small but fierce. He'd crumbled, his pride dust, and I'd given him nothing, just as he'd left me. It wasn't spite, it was balance, a closure that settled clean and light. I pocketed the phone and stepped back into the kitchen, the heat folding around me like a welcome. Tina glanced up, her knife stilling, a question flickering in her eyes. But I gave her a nod, and she grinned, diving back into her prep. Elias caught the moment, his brow lifting, but he stayed quiet, letting it pass. The shift wound down, the last orders sent out, and I walked to the window, the city's lights smoldering against the dusk. My crate sat empty now, my knives settled in their new home, my journal waiting for the next chapter. I thought of La Lumiere, its flame guttering, its name fading under Vincent's grasp. I didn't need to watch it die, I'd heard it in his voice, felt it in the weight he couldn't carry. 15 years I'd given them, years they'd overlooked, tossing me aside like a spent husk. But here at Étoile Noire, I'd built something true, my fire burning bright with every plate. Tina's laugh cut through, bright and clear, as she teased a cook across the line, her ease a spark I'd nurtured. I turned from the window, the scent of paprika and thyme lingering in the air, and pulled my journal from the shelf. I flipped to a blank page, my pen scratching out a new recipe, a twist on the old sauce, something bold for this new kitchen. This wasn't about settling scores, it was about knowing my worth, a truth I'd forged in heat and time. The city hummed beyond the glass, and I smiled, my hand steady on the page. Vincent had lost his game, but I'd plated my redemption, served with fire and grace. Looking back, I see it sharp as a honed blade. Those 15 years at La Lumiere taught me my worth isn't tied to a single stove. Vincent thought he could scrap me like a failed dish. But I'd crafted something he couldn't claim, a legacy no one could steal. It wasn't just the sauce, it was knowing what I'd built, what I could still offer. Loyalty can chain you, but vision sets you free, and sometimes the boldest step is turning the table on those who doubt you. Tina showed me strength grows in others too, her fire a spark I'd lit, proving we rise higher together. At Étoile Noire, I seasoned my redemption, a taste of what grit and heart can do. So I ask you, what's your dish? That piece of yourself you've poured your soul into. Ever had to flip the script on someone who underestimated you? Or found an ally who lifted you up? Tell me about a time you turned the tables, share your wins in the comments below. It's been a hell of a journey, and I'm glad you've been here for it. Let's catch up soon, over a fresh story, a new flame. Keep cooking your truth.